Hi, my name is Gracie, and in this video I'm going to be showing you how to make this dress the Adrift Shift. You can buy the sewing pattern on my website graciesteele.com, and I will list some more information about that below. The dress comes with two optional necklines, so we've got the sweetheart neck here or the round neck here. The back for the round neck has an opening which you can add ties, or if you like, you can hack it to add a little button loop there. The Adrift Shift can be made in a multitude of fabrics. So here obviously I've got the broderie anglaise on. This one is in a mechanical suiting. I've got a silk one here. I've also got this one here with this gorgeous border embroidery at the hem. The pattern is intended to be a beautiful foundation for you to build on. So whether you build on it by using a statement print or add a ruffle collar like one of my testers did, you can turn it into a maxi dress for a full statement. It's really up to you what you do with it. Now, it is intended for beginner sewers, and what I would recommend is that when you download the pattern, you read through the instruction booklet and you give this video a watch before diving in, and it'll give you a really beautiful overview of the pattern and how simply it can come together. Now, I've sewn a few of these and I think that I've gotten my sew time down to between 1 and 2 hours, and that's including taping together the pattern. So if you're a more advanced or an intermediate sewist who just wants a really quick palette cleanser and something to have a little bit of fun with, this pattern is probably for you. I will mention that if you are unsure what size to sew, it's recommended to size up. There is positive ease through the bust, waist and hip, which means that it's a little bit roomy, but some fabrics, your heavier weight fabrics, tend to be a bit more forgiving with the size when you do size up. So just keep that in mind when you're picking your size. When you purchase the pattern from my website, you will receive a download link, and in that link will be the pattern files. So you've got A4 US letter, A0 and copy shop, as well as projector format. Alright, so first things first, make sure that your fabric has been washed, dried and pressed before you take it to be cut. So here I've got my back piece. I'm going to make sure I mark these spots here. So the notches, as well as that center back opening, that hip notch down there, and then the front I'll be marking the same, the notches, the dart apex. Now that they're all cut, I'm just showing you here, these are the front and back pattern pieces to give you a rough idea. So first up, we are going to sew the darts. So we're going to match the notches, and this is how I like to do it personally. If you've got your own favorite way to do it, by all means, you do you. So I like to fold my fabric over so that that apex is marked by that pin sort of down the bottom there. Then I'll leave my needle in and slide my fabric under so that then the needle is in between those sort of notch cuttings there, and then I will sew along that dart. Now, we don't backstitch at the ends of the darts. We have to leave nice long tails that will tie off a little bit later. So you can see that one is sewn. So now we will sew the other back shoulder. So again, folding it right sides together, matching those notches and heading down towards that point. Alright, so now let's do our bust darts. So the exact same principle. So I'm poking that needle so that it's not, pulling the fabric in any weird direction anymore, and it's just marking that end point, and then matching those notches and pinning it all together. So we can see that's all sitting nice and flat along there, and I'm just adding another pin for extra security. So same thing again with that needle in, wedging it between the fabric with those notches and stitching along the dart. My favorite thing with the darts is to make sure that you curve it in the other direction when you get to the end, and this helps to make it nice and smooth at the end instead of a really sharp point. So I've just gone and given all of those darts a nice press, and you can see, you know, there's no awkward pointy bits anywhere. They just have a really beautiful shape to them. So now we are going to sew the shoulder seams and the side seams. So I am pinning along the shoulders. My fabric is right sides together, and you'll notice that the dart matches the notch at the shoulder as well. So I'm going to take this time here to quickly knot those thread tails. I like to tie them 3 times and then snip them about 5 mil long. So we're pinning the other shoulder there. And now I'm going to do the same for the bust dart thread tails. So tying those off, snipping, and I'm going to pin along the length of the side seams. So again, matching up those notches all the way down the length. Now this fabric is cut on the diagonal, so try not to pull it because it will stretch. Even if you're not using a stretch fabric, when it's cut on the diagonal like this, there is some give. Now because I'm using the hem detail with this fabric, I've got to try and match up the embroidery here. And then we'll do the same for the other side. So tying off that bust dart and pinning along the side seam. Now you can use as little or as many pins as you like. I like to at least put a pin at each of the notches. So now we are sewing where we pinned, making sure to backstitch at the start and the finish of each seam. So a backstitch is when you go forwards a few, then backwards a few, before going forwards again. And it just helps to keep it all secure and prevent that seam from unraveling. So that is the shoulders sewn, and now we are going to sew the side seams. Now it is good practice to remove your pins and not sew over them. If you sew straight over them, it's not the end of the world, but you do risk blunting your needle or snapping a needle. So not great. You don't really want needles flying in your eyes. Now we are going to finish all of those seams. So finishing the edges means doing something to them to stop them from fraying pretty much. So if you don't have an overlocker or a serger, you can zigzag these edges. You could also use pinking shears on them, or like what I'm doing here is just whizzing through on the overlocker. All right, now that those seams are all finished, we're going to give them a nice press. Pressing is one of the most important things to sewing a beautiful garment. So that's looking nice and crisp. That is the main body done. Now we are onto the facing. So I've marked my back pieces and these are my front pieces here. I'm going to take my back arm sky facings and pin them to the front arm side. I always say that wrong. I think it's actually arm side. Anyway, so we're pinning those at the shoulder and at the side seam, and you can see by that little B there that's down marking the back piece. And now I am pinning my front facing, so again at the shoulders, and now we're going to sew those all together. Now you'll notice that I have not interfaced these pieces. That's because the fabric that I'm working with is pretty sheer and I didn't want the texture of the interfacing to be seen through, but I do really recommend to use interfacing. So this is finishing off those seams there, and now I'm going to just gently finger press the seams over towards the back and then pin them in place. So this is going to help me to know which side is which, as well as helping everything to sit nicely at the end. So So these are the arm side facings, and from my B you can see one's the left and one's the right. Same again with the neck facing, and now we are going to serge or overlock the big bottom edges of all of those. So having those seams pressed in the right direction is really helpful here. Just make sure you don't forget to remove those pins. And again, if you don't have an overlocker, just zigzag these. All right, so this is our neck facing, and we are going to attach that to the main. So we're going to put it right sides together, the front to the front and the back to the back. And I always like to start by pinning the shoulder seams first, so matching those up and then working my way around. Now, because these pieces are cut as curves, they can also be a bit stretchy. So just be really careful not to pull and stretch things. If you cut it properly and if you pressed everything nicely, everything should just match up perfectly. And you shouldn't need to pull anything. So this is working around the front neck, pinning it all right sides together, and now we're onto the back. So I have a pin in my center back there to match that marking, and I'm going to pin along the rest of that curve. I like to secure this, the back of the facing where the opening is going to be down now as well, just so it's not flapping about. So I've just removed to expose the arm of the machine, and now I am sewing using my 1 centimeter seam allowance all the way around that arm side. I think I'm saying that right now. Round and round we go. Now take your time with this. We do want it to be nice and neat. And I'll backstitch at the end there. Now this is where we have to clip into the curve. So I like to use my pinking shears here. I only got these recently and they've honestly been a bit of a game changer for me. Now, if you don't have them, that's okay. Just clip little wedges out about, I don't know, 1 to 2 centimeters apart as in the instructions. And now to help those facings to sit neatly, we're going to understitch them. So I've moved my needle position all the way over to the left and then back in one position. So it's at the 0.5, I think it is on the machine. And I'm pushing that little clipped seam allowance over towards the facing, working from the inside and stitching it down flat. So I'm lining up the sort of little crease in my foot with the seam, and you'll see that this row of stitching is really, really close to the seam. So see that really teeny tiny row of stitching there, and this helps to keep everything in and neat. If you don't clip your corners nicely enough as well, you'll notice that things won't turn and sit quite as flat. So now that the neck has been understitched, we're going to work on the back opening. So this part is not applicable for the sweetheart neck because you don't need to have an opening to be able to fit your head through the hole. Anyway, so I am matched up the center back line with the marking that we put from the pattern piece, and I've just fed through the front skirt all the way so that I'm working only with starting at the center back neck on the machine, and we're going to sew straight down along that marking, rotate at the bottom, and then sew back up again. So make sure when you rotate that you leave your needle in, it's sort of like your anchor point. And when I stitch across here, I like to count how many stitches it takes to get to the center point, and then I'll do the same over to the other side, and that's how I know that it's always going to be nice and centered and even on each side. So we're going back up the other end now, and you can see that back facing has been stitched to the main back. This is the fun part. So now we are going to snip straight down that line, and when we get close to the end, we're going to snip into a little V. Now you want to snip as close as possible to these stitches in those corners without going through the stitches. When you turn it out, it should all sit nice and flat. If you haven't snipped close enough, you'll see that there's sort of pulling. So just turn it back out and go again. So this is turning that facing right side out, just rolling that corner, and same on the other side. And now I'm just giving that a really neat press, and you can see at the base there that that's all sitting pretty nicely. So for my ties, I'm going to use this piece of pre-made bias just because it's quick and easy. So I am folding it right sides out. And now I'm going to edge stitch along it. Now, this is a handy little trick. Notice how I'm pulling the thread tails here to help to feed that fabric through at the start. So that looks like it's stitching all along neatly now, and I actually ran out of bobbin thread, but that was okay because I cut this piece way too long, so that was fine. So I'm snipping the end thread there, and I will probably just use a match later because this is a polyester to melt the edge to make sure it doesn't fray. So I'm snipping that in half, so I've got 2 ties for the center back now, and we've got to turn these back. Now that I know that it's all sitting nicely, I put it back to being right sides together to unpick a few stitches to then wedge those ties in. So I'm doing these a little bit down from the top edge purely because I think it'll look cute, but place this wherever you want to. You can also just do 1 loop and then a button on the other side. So I've got my tie here, and I'm going in between the main and that back facing piece and poking it through that tiny hole that I just unpicked. So there'll be a little bit hanging in the seam allowance, and that was the 5 millimeters of seam allowance there. And then same for the other side, poking it through, checking that they're nice and even on each side. And now that bit that we unpicked, we're going to stitch back again. Now, I kind of go back and forth over this a couple of times just to make sure that nothing unravels. And now when we pull that tie out, you can see where it's going to sit. So that looks nice in there. Let's do the other side. And how cute is this little bow? Oh, I love it. All right, so now let's attach the facings for the armholes or the arm size. So identifying which one's the left and right and back and front, etc. Matching up those seams, and again, just like the neckline, nothing should have to be pulled or stretched into place. The curves should perfectly match each other. So we are pinning all of the way around, and we're going to do the same as what we did around the neck. So stitching them right sides together, round, round, round we go. Taking the time with those curves. And my favorite pinking shears, here they are again. Trim, trim, trim. And then understitching the whole way around, and we're just about done. So once you finish these facings, all that's really left is the hem. With this one, I'm doing something a little bit different than in the instructions, and I'm hand sewing the facings together at the shoulders here. And then I'll put a few tacks in at the side seam, mostly because this fabric is so see-through. This is just going to hold those facings in and in place in a really nice, neat way. I hope that you had fun watching this tutorial, and I hope that you give the Adrift Shift a go. Please don't forget to tag me on Instagram at @ByGracieSteele and #AdriftShift so that we can all see your beautiful new garment.